This is chapter 4 of the book Angry at God, The Incredible Power of Forgiveness. The previous 3 chapters and an introduction are also on YouTube and our church page, Parma Christian Fellowship Church. The sermons that match these chapters, this is the Bible study, the deeper study portion, are also on YouTube and on our church page at Parma Christian Fellowship Church. So if you're interested, you can look at that. Chapter 4, Being Angry at God. Final chapter of this short book really has the primary lesson that we want to learn. What did Jonah believe God was like? What are God's boundaries? What are God's requirements according to human expectations? How does Jonah react when God lets him down in a major way? The entire issue is not minor stuff. It is the big leagues of justice, of evil, divine power, repentance, grace, and passion. It is in this chapter that Jonah expresses his very legitimate rage directed at God and, oddly, a plant, both of which Jonah feels have let him down. Rage has become characteristic of Jonah. This chapter is painfully true to life, not only Jonah's life, but our life. Unresolved anger can become so pervasive that it leaks out in every direction. Jonah believes he is completely justified in his anger, that his accusations against God failing at his primary task are accurate and valid. Jonah truly believes that he has a right, every right, to be so furious about these matters. And God does not blast him off the face of the earth for his arrogance and self-absorbed, blinded righteousness. God talks with Jonah calmly. The book ends with a question, not an answer. Vital verse 7, New International Version. But to Jonah, this seemed very wrong, and he became angry. I'm reading Jonah 4, verse 1. That's Vital verse 7. King James Version, chapter 4, verse 1. But it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was very angry. New American Standard Bible. But it greatly displeased Jonah, and he became angry. Details in Vital verse 7. Seemed very wrong, or displeased exceedingly. This translation by the New International Version minimizes the very strong language of the original Hebrew. The word ra, resh ayin he, was used in Jonah 1, verse 2, the first vital verse, to contain the entire sum of the absolute wickedness of Nineveh. It is most often translated evil. The definition is worth repeating here. Evil contains everything horrible, destructive, malicious, and awful imaginable at the instigation of mankind, demonic forces, or nature. It is the same word used in Jonah 3:10, vital verse 6. Fascinating aspect of Jonah 4:1 is that the root ra, resh ayin he, appears twice in the first clause of this verse. The 3 emphatic adverbs the versions use are very, exceedingly, and greatly. All 3 modifiers fall short of the emphasis the Hebrew presents by doubling the word. Evil is both a verb form and a noun form in the sentence from resh ayin he, ra. And the evil fills Jonah completely as he contemplates God repenting of the evil, same word, as a predicate adjective that he had intended to do. English has no active verb to evil something, but Hebrew does. English can use the word evil as a predicate adjective to be evil, or a predicate direct object to do evil. But Hebrew has a verb, to evil. It's an active, dynamic verb. In Vital Verse 7, the noun for evil and the verb for to evil are the subject and predicate of this sentence. Great evil was eviling to Jonah. The whole story begins with Jonah running west because the Ninevites were just too evil for him to cry out to, and now the evil is inside Jonah. Doubled. It's incredibly intense. Angry. The root of the Hebrew verb is charar, chet resh resh, charar, from which we get our English word char. It is an intense verb meaning to burn or to become fiery hot. It communicates burning hot anger, absolutely intense rage, fury. We offer this translation of the feeling of Jonah 4:1. And it, Jonah's sense that God failed to do God's work, and instead he repented of the evil disaster that God had threatened to do, was horribly evil, as totally wrong as any outcome could ever be. And Jonah burst into a flaming rage aimed directly at God. Insights from Vital Verse 7. Jonah's initial prayer conversation with God lasts 2 verses. Vital Verse 7 is the lead-in to Jonah's accusations against God, which Jonah presents as a former conversation, the reasons why he ran westward instead of obediently coming eastward. Jonah issues 5 accusations of sorts about God's character that Jonah feels justifies his resistance completely, and as if these 5 items are what is wrong with God. You are a gracious God. You are a compassionate God. You are slow to anger, not heat, but intensity. You are abounding in covenant loving kindness. You are a God who repents from evil. 5 accusations. These are not compliments in Jonah's mind. The slant of Jonah's accusations is that God owes it only to the chosen people and to Jonah and to this nation who hold exclusive rights to all those qualities in God. Jonah's rage stems from his horrifying discovery that God is actually gracious, compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in kindness, and restrictive of doing destruction to all of mankind. Jonah says that he even told God earlier that these qualities were grossly misaligned when provided for horrendous people like the Ninevites. Jonah says he tried to forestall God's display of all these traits, which is why he ran Tarshishward to the west instead of Ninevehward to the east. He is so sick from rage that he would rather die than live. That is passionate, potent anger at God, and it sets up Vital Verse 8. Vital Verse 8, Jonah 4:4, the New International Version. But the Lord replied, "Is it right for you to be angry?" King James Version, 4:4. Then the Lord said, doest thou well to be angry? New American Standard Bible. The Lord said, do you have good reason to be angry? Details in vital verse 8. Jonah 4:4. Is it right? Is it well? Do you have good reason? God's reply to Jonah is a 3-word question in Hebrew. It's only 3 words. The first root word is yatav, yod, teth, beth. This word is widely used, very generalized, and is a primary root word, to be or to do good. It is related to the simplest word for good, teth, bet, which is tov. It has many applications and can be translated by many expressions. These many expressions include, are you right? Do you have a right? Is it good? Are you good? Does it benefit? Are you doing well? Is it the right thing to do? The completion of this word is the anger or rage of Jonah's passion. And the third word is a reflexive directional word, back to you. The question is actually very simple. Good rage yours? Do you have a right, in your view, to be this angry? Is it right what this anger is doing to you? Who does this rage benefit in your thinking? All of those suggestions are possible. Insights from vital verse 8. The question asked of Jonah by God, as worded in Hebrew, is quite gentle, but deeply penetrating to the heart of the issue on which Jonah is confronting God. Jonah disengages from the conversation again, as has been his tendency all along. He has no response recorded at all. Silence. He ignores God's question altogether. Just simply shuts down. The stakes are as high and as intense as can be imagined as this saga unfolds. Jonah's excruciating resentment is boundless, and its toxic effects have spread through Jonah's mind and soul. To demonstrate clearly to Jonah and to all readers of the book what the real issue is, God sets up a very revealing experiment. There seems to be a slight warble in the time sequence of the storyline in Jonah 4. The event of Jonah crying out the cry God had given him, described in Jonah 3:4, is put in an immediate juxtaposition to the Ninevites repenting, and the king becoming involved to extend their attitude of repentance to a complete reversal of their evil ways, as described in Jonah 3:5-9. God then repents of the evil God had intended to bring on Nineveh, described in Jonah 3:10, the pivotal verse of the book. Jonah's expression of his rage at God sets the tension in its highest possible mode, using extreme language in Jonah 4:1-3, until the moment God de-escalates the situation with a gentle but deeply philosophical question in Jonah 4:4. To create a parallel layering of two situations, one on top of the other, Jonah 4:5-9 uses the same extreme language for rage, evil, and all the circumstances that happen next. The storyline goes back in time to the events that happened between Jonah 3:3 and Jonah 3:4. There's like an invisible space or an unspoken space that happens between those two verses. After Jonah delivers his 5-word threat of destruction about to descend upon these absolutely evil people, Jonah goes outside the city to its east edge, climbs some kind of higher ground, makes himself a small shelter to protect him from the blazing sun, and sits down under the shelter. And Jonah waits. He just waits. See what's going to happen. He watches. He waited to see what was going to happen to the city in Jonah 4:5. He says so. He hopes and believes utter, absolute destruction is going to fall on Nineveh in 40 days, 39 days, 38, 4, 3, 2, 1, nothing. Nothing at all. Really, God? And Jonah erupts into a rage. But two situations are presented as happening simultaneously. God provides a gourd, or a leafy plant, that will grow up quickly and shade Jonah from the evil, same word, resh, ayin, hey, evil, discomfort of the sun's heat, in spite of the fact that Jonah had already built a shelter for himself for that purpose, to keep him shaded from the sun. Then God provides a worm that withers the plant, and its shade fails, and the sun blazes like it always does. Jonah's reaction to this briefly existing plant failing him is as excruciatingly vicious, a profound, heated rage that equaled Jonah's anger about God repenting from the evil that God had threatened to do. In Jonah's mind, God had promised the judgment was going to happen, and then it didn't. Twice, Jonah is consumed by an anger he does consider fully justified. Twice, God has questioned Jonah about his anger. The same basic language in Hebrew is used in Jonah 4, chapter 4, verse 8b and verse 9, as was used in Jonah 3b and 4. Jonah 4, 3b, the second half of 3 and 4. It is better for me to die than to live. But the Lord replied, is it right for you to be angry? Chapter 4, verse 8, the second half, and verse 9. It would be better for me to die than to live. But God said to Jonah, is it right for you to be angry? This time around, however, Jonah does not reply to God's question. Jonah does reply to God's question. It is, he said, and I am so angry I wish I was dead. Jonah 4:9. The storyline now sets up two parallel situations. One, a cosmic level philosophical question about God not obliterating truly horrific, evil people and protecting his own people who are entitled to God's protection and God's justice. And the other, a minor, benign, bothersome circumstance about a plant not shading a man from the sun for a couple of hours. Those two things could not be further different from each other in terms of the magnitude of importance. God protecting his people from truly evil circumstances, and a plant that shields a guy from the sun for a little bit. In the midst of this swirling, pain-filled tension, the resolution of the book occurs in one single verse. Jonah 4:11. It is vital verse 9. Vital verse 9. It's quite long. New International Version, Jonah 4. Vital verse 9 is verses 10 to 11. It's actually one long sentence. But the Lord said, you have been concerned about this plant, though you did not tend it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and died overnight. And should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals? King James Version. Then said the Lord, thou hast had pity on the gourd, For that which thou hast not labored, neither madest it grow, which came up in a night, and perished in a night. And should not I spare Nineveh, that great city, wherein there are more than 60,000 persons that cannot discern between their right hand and their left hand, and also much cattle? New American Standard. Then the Lord said, you had compassion on the plant, for which you did not work, and which you did not cause to grow, which came up overnight, and perished overnight. Should not I have compassion on Nineveh, the great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know the difference between their right hand and their left hand, as well as many animals? Details in Vital Verse 9. You have been concerned about, had pity on, or had compassion on. In God's response to Jonah's second confession about his rage, the key word translated to be concerned, or to have pity on, or to have compassion on, is the verb cheves. Chet vav samek. Cheves. The same verb is used of Jonah's attitude in the first half of the verse as God's attitude in the second half of the verse. The NIV and the NASB preserve this continuity. The King James Version disguises it, changing the translation from pity to spare, but it's the same word in both places. In contrast to the intense language that has been used all the way through the book of Jonah, suddenly the language becomes very soft. Insights from Vital Verse 9. God points out Jonah's emotionally positive attitude towards a measly plant. Jonah is described as feeling great joy about the shade of this plant, Jonah 4:6. He is happy about the plant that lived for a day or so, but was gone without residue. He wanted the plant to be spared, King James Version, or receive compassion, New American Standard. The same verb describes Jonah's describes Jonah's choice towards the plant as God's choice towards the Ninevites. It's a choice to be happy and joyful, to show pity or compassion, and Jonah chooses it towards the plant, and God chooses it towards the enemy nation. Jonah has a legitimate concern for the plant which served his own interests and comfort, but not for the human beings that were his enemies, whom Jonah regarded as completely worthless because of their sin. They did sin. Jonah regards them as worthless as a result. The direct intentional comparison in Vital Verse 9 is between Jonah, a prophet, a man created in the image of God, and God, the sustainer and redeemer of all mankind. God is essentially compassionate and gracious. God owns final judgment, to be sure, and God may suspend that judgment at any time, for any reason, by any means. Jonah is also compassionate, but in a very different way. Jonah is compassionate towards a plant with big, broad leaves that shielded him from the sun on a hot day. He had nothing to do with creating, sustaining, or ending that plant. It merely served his purposes for his momentary comfort. Both Jonah and God show compassion, but Jonah's compassion is shallow and selfish, while God's compassion is genuine and redemptive. Jonah hates that about God. That's why he's so angry. This ninth vital verse, and thus the entire book, ends with a question, which God puts to Jonah as a way of addressing Jonah's uncontained and incessant rage. Should I not have compassion on the great city of Nineveh, with its 120,000 morally bankrupt, spiritually ignorant human beings, plus all their silly domesticated animals that have no idea of what's happening at all? Is this question rhetorical, or is it interrogative? Is God simply making a statement, I have compassion on the great city? Or is God asking Jonah to think through this tremendous issue and come up with an answer? Shouldn't I have compassion? Shouldn't I forgive? Isn't there incredible power in forgiveness? How would you answer God? The epilogue is next week.